We would now like to say hello to the head of Tikva Hadasha, who is a candidate for Prime Minister, Gideon Saar. Hello, welcome. This summit is primarily about social cohesion issues, and due to that, I'd like to tell you what the data says and then to ask for your comment. So, according to the ADL Israel survey, 90% of respondents say that the political leadership, meaning you, are responsible for division, then the new and traditional media, 84%, and finally, 74% think that the rabbis and religious leadership are responsible for this division. What do you think? I think it's true that the state of Israel in the past few years, parties and politicians have defined themselves by negating others. I am anti ultra Orthodox, I am anti Arab, I'm anti leftist, I am anti right wing, I am anti settlers. And it's an easy way to gain votes and popularity because negative emotions exist and you can, ride this wave. I don't believe in that. I believe in forging a positive, ideal identity. I have never taken part in a discourse that is against sectors in society. I don't believe in it. I certainly do believe that Israel, the one that waits around the corner, somewhere nearby, hopefully, when the current regime will be over, will have to be united and healed, and I think I'll be able to do that. You're talking about messages against certain populations, but I want to ask you, as part of this division, does it not have to do with all this discourse of banning others? We won't sit with the joint list, who represent a large part of society, the Arab society. We won't sit with Meretz, who also represent a large part of society. Perhaps this discourse of shunning others and banning others also plays a part. Well, we have a parliamentary rule, and if we don't sit with the joint list, it's not because the joint list is primarily Arab. The views of Ofer Kasif are not better than the views held by other members of that list. In our party, we also have representatives of minorities. It's not the problem. The problem is an ideological gap that is huge in terms of how Israel is viewed as a Jewish democratic country. And it still allows for collaboration. I have collaborated often with MKs from the joint list when I was in the opposition, and Netanyahu was in favor of it. I kept sitting with them, with the Arab parties, seeing what we can agree on. We can agree on legislation on social issues. We can agree on those. But when you set up a coalition that has to have a common denominator and is dependent upon its composition, then that's the way you do it. And we don't go against it. We don't. It's Netanyahu who says that, and he talks about excluding someone, and there's no such rule in a democratic regime where if you lose elections, you must crawl into the government, which is what Netanyahu expects from his rivals. There is no such rule, and it's also wrong. But what you're saying is that there is a kind of engineering of people's views. You're saying we don't collaborate with the Arabs because they support terrorism on the one hand. On the other hand, you are sent to collaborate with them, but only behind the scenes. Yes, and there's also a third aspect beyond legitimization. Fatih Mullah goes to the Palestinian Authority and asks them to intervene in Israeli elections. And if anyone else would have done that, who's not from that angle, then this country would have been shaken. So they're playing with our heads. There is a difference between a reasoned ideological dispute and what's happening now. Because when someone doesn't agree with me ideologically, I respect the other person, I respect their opinion. I can disagree with them, that's okay. But there's a difference between that and delegitimization. Let's talk about this finding about the religious leadership. 74% of respondents indicate that the religious leadership is the problem. Do you understand why such a finding was provided? Some people experience in their interface with the rabbinate, experiences with divorce, with marriage, that are not easy experiences. And I don't think that in certain issues, the rabbinate made sure to bring people closer to Judaism. And I think that there's an interesting duality in Israeli society. Most people are close to culture and heritage, but they don't want coercion, and there's a conflict between those two things. And I think that most of Israeli society, when they say, "I feel like I have my part in the in Israeli heritage or in Jewish heritage," and everyone interprets it differently, and I think we should fight for that. But it is my right to have one opinion or another. I think it's very important. Is it feasible for there to be reforms, changes in this establishment that is considered, the holy of holies, and so on? I think so. I think that some ideas have come up that are very important in the tax committee, in the when conversion was discussed. There is a large population who came from the former Soviet Union. They serve in the IDF. They came here as part of the right of return, the law of return. And if you want to join the Jewish people, of course, this is a Jewish law, a halachic-based conversion. And it's also an attitude to connect, to bring people closer. I think there's room for repair here. What is your opinion when it comes to the High Court of Justice's decision on conservative and reform conversions, which wreaked havoc in the right wing, saying the High Court of Justice are taking over? Well, it would have been better if the High Court of Justice had stayed out of it. But why did it happen? Because for 16 years, the government has not decided. The Nissim committee was set up, and not only did they not reach a decision, they haven't even convened a meeting for 2 years to discuss this. And the Nissim committee recommendations were in the right direction. They were balanced. But unfortunately, because nothing happened with it, the High Court of Justice had to intervene. I hope that after the elections, everyone will be responsible, will show responsibility, will try to unite, and we have the foundation to do so, I think. Maybe this is the most explosive things in Israeli society. Look, until now, the ultra-Orthodox parties have prevented this solution, but that's why it became a High Court of Justice verdict. I think that the Nissim committee is a good foundation. Not just me, but also other political parties think it forms a good foundation. I think that we need to try, based on this foundation, to create a consensus. And if we're not be able to do that, it'll be a big shame. You said the High Court of Justice shouldn't have intervened, but still, the High Court of Justice didn't want to intervene, but in this particular case, there was no other choice because the legislator gave no solution. Netanyahu, let's call a spade a spade. Netanyahu did not discuss, did not make decisions, and brought the situation to this point, and that was a mistake, in my opinion. How can that impact Israel's nature as a state? Look, these are very sensitive issues where you have to do everything in your power to reach a consensus or a broad agreement on, first of all, here in Israel, but also while discussing it with the world jury. Because at the end of the day, the unity of the Jewish people is, first of all, a value, but also a strategic asset. And we must not forget that. And if we won't be able to do that, we will pay for it. We will be less than what we want to be, and we won't be as strong. Is there any connection to this alliance between Netanyahu and the ultra-Orthodox parties, which has created a situation whereby there are some things that you can't even open up to negotiation, that you simply cannot touch? So what's the outcome? If the outcome is this High Court of Justice ruling, then I don't think it's an outcome that neither Netanyahu nor the ultra-Orthodox parties wanted. We must understand that this issue, we have to make decisions on it. We can't run away from decision making. Can you create a discussion with the ultra-Orthodox members of Knesset on this? Well, I hope that now that there's been a ruling, everyone will understand, all parties involved will understand that it will be best to set up a meeting, set up a discussion, and have the political system decide. But there's no such a world where there's no compromise. I don't know of any such world. And I think that what Moshe Nissim has proposed, and by the way, he's an Orthodox Jew, I think he has provided a good foundation for this discussion. Why is the ultra-Orthodox and Arab sectors, why are they not integrated fully? Is it a matter of priorities? Is it a matter of budget? Well, there are different things everywhere. For instance, in the Haredi population, there are barriers that stem from the fact that their education system does not end the same way as ours. When I was the Minister of Education, for example, I unilaterally recognized the sole exams that the female ultra-Orthodox students study after 12 years and what the tests they take. I unilaterally recognize those tests so that they can only go halfway toward the matriculation exam so that they can go into the workforce, so that they can then go on to higher education. So there are ways of doing that. You need to understand the barriers. In the Arab society, we have to analyze that, but there is a problem with the language and how fluent they are in Hebrew, and that's something they need to work on for various reasons. Teaching languages, Arabic, and through cable, through satellite, they also consume the Arab channels, TV channels. And when I was the Minister of Education, I went to a Bedouin school in the north of Israel. Perhaps it was my first visit in the Arab sector. And I was shocked when I spoke to the students and they didn't understand basic Hebrew. At the end of the day, you're living in a country where the majority speaks Hebrew. So we have to identify these barriers and then address them so that it will be easier for such publics and sectors to integrate into the economy. Is it maybe time to define Arabic as an official language of Israel? Look, the nation state law says that Hebrew is the official language and Arabic is a prioritized language or one with a special status. Yes, of course, that makes them angry. But this special status has been preserved. So when they teach in schools, they teach in Arabic. The official documents, we can communicate in Arabic. So in everyday use, the status of Arabic has not been downgraded, but at the end of the day, it's a Jewish state, and I think it has and I think a special status is very respectable and it's okay. I don't think it's perceived as illegitimate as in many other countries where they only have one official language. Israel also should have just one official language. And by the way, it's also important for the Arab minority to be fluent in Hebrew. Okay, to conclude, I'd like to ask you, to what extent are you committed to what you call healing Israeli society, to replace the regime, to kind of refresh it? Maybe if you're not prime minister, are you willing to let go of the prime minister's seat as long as there's a different constellation formed? Ego is not any consideration. The only consideration is the greater good and the best interest of Israeli society. Bennett says, I won't sit with Lapid. Lapid says, I will sit with the joint list. But you can't form a government based on the joint list. So you put one and one together and you realize that the only change can come really from us. We're the only hope for change. There is no alternative. And if there was an alternative, then that's the same situation we had before we came along. Why did we come along? Because in Israeli society, in Israeli political system, that's what we can do to unite everyone. Head of Tikva Hadasha, Gideon Saar, thank you very much.